Our first point is that when most people think of economics, they think of the stock market, currency, banking, money flows, balance sheets, and this is fundamentally misguided and alienated because the centerpiece of economics is production. Production, the great need of the world, production. We live in an impoverished world of scarcity, immiseration, and underproduction of all the basic things that you need. And when you go on these websites, right, some guy has got a funny money theory, a community currency theory, a state banking theory, a social credit theory. It's all about manipulating money, banking, the Federal Reserve, and so forth. And when you go through one of these studies and they don't talk about production, throw it away. Throw it away. Like the state banking website, right? That every state should have a bank, and then if you do that, you're going to have prosperity. Yeah, prosperity based on what? You got to be able to identify the next step, right? We've tried to do it. These ideas about maglev rail, fast rail, nuclear power, even more so thermonuclear power, space, biotechnology, defeat the killer diseases, high energy physics, meaning fusion. Right? So those are the next steps for humanity, the great projects, right, of infrastructure. I do have some slides on those. So forget about tinkering with currency, funny money, Bitcoin. If you got any Bitcoins, flee, run. It's a bubble. That's a Ponzi scheme. That depends on a constant flow of suckers coming in and buying it, right? That's worse than Madoff. I don't know what these people learned. The libertarians, of course, very much in the Bitcoin. If you want to see an asset go to zero, hold on. And here I would say gold is better than Bitcoin. Gold will not go to zero. Gold is going to be worth something, but Bitcoin, I think, will be worth zero in our lifetime, certainly. So what does production mean? Tangible, physical, manufacturing, commodity production. The technical definition is progressive changes in the order of nature. In other words, taking the material universe and reshaping it at all levels, the macro realm, the micro realm, the microscopic realm, you name it, vaccines, nanotechnology, big, small, progressive changes. In other words, beneficial changes for us, humans, in the order of nature that we bring about. And tangible physical production. So again, think of steel, chemicals, electronics, agriculture, mining, scientific research. Scientific research is now a tremendously important part of production. Aerospace, infrastructure, but not derivatives, not junk bonds, not financial instruments of any kind, financial services. And as soon as you find an economist, so-called, who doesn't talk about production, junk it, run, write a critique. Now, any social phenomenon tends to have two sides. We've been talking about this the whole time. Objective, subjective. And economics is no exception. So let's look first at what the objective side, well, let's look at subjective since that's what we have. The subjective side of economics is what public opinion, politics, academia are most interested in. Prices. What determines prices? Well, you might say, who cares? But this is the big thing for them, the Holy Grail. So Ricardo is interested, the Austrians are interested. Prices of everything. The stock market. The balance sheets and profits of banks and corporations. Real estate prices. Right? All the subjective side of economics. What's the objective side? We're dealing now not in money units. We're probably going to be dealing in physical units or in per capita qualities of labor. How many tons of iron ore? How many tons of steel? How many tons of copper? How much coal per capita? Total per square mile, per capita, and so forth. What does your heavy chemical industry look like? What are your housing starts? In terms of your national housing stock, how many square meters of housing per person? One of the classic points is to be ready for the technology on the horizon, children have to have their own room to study, assuming that's what they're going to do. And now we have the internet, right? That proposition is perhaps becoming a little bit more problematic. Maybe you want to have one big room. But how many square meters of housing per person? How old is it? What does the plumbing look like? How about the air conditioning? Do you have central heating? Is it nice? Is there a subjective factors even here? In terms of your nutrition, how many calories per day? What's your vitamin quality, right? What's the content of this stuff? How many years of school can you manage, right? Does the majority of your population have a bachelor's degree? How many have advanced degrees? In what? Do they have degrees in postmodernist studies or classical curriculum or science, math, engineering, and the rest? So those are objective. One of the problems we have is the United States population has been denied the truth that we're in a depression and have been since 2008. And the big thing that people are aware of is that this has been a long decline. We have to make them aware that they have suffered a decline of about 2/3 in their standard of living. Right? All these politicians who prate about the American dream is long gone. 2/3 of the standard of living in 1967 is gone. And remember what you're talking about. You're saying that the prevalent standard of living in 1967 had a certain relation to the technologies appearing on the horizon, right? Where the children have to be prepared for education on that level. If we compare that to today, right, the children, we're not talking about absolute numbers, in other words. It's not an absolute one-for-one comparison, but it's rather sort of proportional. Today, with the children in the home, what percentage are we giving them of that which would be necessary to prepare them for the horizon technologies? And on that level, we're falling farther and farther behind in terms of standards of living. Part of the problem is the Democratic Party under Obama has stubbornly refused to have a job creation program. Why did the Democrats lose the 2014 election? Because they refused to have a job creation program, despite the fact that this is the big thing. Now, the other big distinction we have to talk about is productive and non-productive. If you look at gross domestic product, gross national product, you will see that it's a mixture of apples and oranges, because it mixes financial services and retail sales, which are not productive, with at least rudimentary forms of production: steel production, chemical production, tire production, scientific research, vaccine production. In other words, some things are productive, some things are not. Generally speaking, everything that you see going through Wall Street, derivatives, stocks, those are not productive. And financial services have gone way beyond any proportional representation. This distinction escapes all Keynesians. They just don't get it. They can't get it. They say, well, you can have tourism, you can have gambling, right? You can build the whole economy on that. No, you can't. And if you try to, you'll have a crash. So again, production means what I called in the way of production, tangible physical production. Now there's a third category, socially necessary. However, socially necessary does not exist in the world by itself. You have your productive labor force. Once you have a productive labor force, then you have socially necessary categories that you must have to serve your labor force. But they are in a function, a relation to your labor force, not to production directly. Healthcare is the leading example. Healthcare is not productive, but it's absolutely socially necessary to maintain your labor force. Teachers, not productive, but absolutely necessary to have a productive labor force. Philosophers, right? Not productive, but absolutely necessary. So there's a third category. And I know some people get really angry when you say, what do you mean I'm not productive? I say, isn't it enough to be socially necessary? Isn't that good enough for you? No! I want to be productive. And I've really had fights with people about this. But the big problem is, of course, the non-productive ones. Your stockbroker is non-productive. I'm sorry. There's no way. Now, these two sides, the objective side and the subjective side, have a relative autonomy in the sense that they can diverge for a long time. They can sometimes seem to be going in opposite directions. And in our world, they sort of seem to. The stock market is going up, up, up. And the standard of living is declining. So how can the stock market go up when the standard of living is declining? Well, you could have asked yourself that back in the dot-com bubble. You'd say your stock price is going up, 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 and you have no revenue. Well, before too long, we find that it's not an absolute autonomy, it's only a relative autonomy. In other words, a coherence of the two numbers is restored. Pow! Like that, with a crash. A panic crash is the typical way that a speculative finance capital economy restores a closer relation between subjective valuation, my stock price is huge, but I have no production and no revenue. I have no products in the pipeline. I have nothing. So that's going to lead to a crash. Same thing with the real estate bubble. It's not such a big deal. That didn't cause anything. The derivatives are the cause, but there was a real estate bubble too, modest as it was compared to the derivatives. And eventually, when you've got to the point where the bubble has exhausted the possibilities of expansion, it collapses and it goes back down to normal, right? Or it gets closer to what the production would suggest. So there is a relative autonomy, and a correlation is typically restored periodically in the form of a crisis, a panic crash of the entire economy. And we've lived through several, right? Everybody here has lived through such panic crashes. The law of value is something like this. If you want to know what something is worth in productive terms, don't ask me what it cost or anything of this sort. Just say, if I have a mass of commodities and I have a workforce, let's say, if I add these commodities to the workforce, will my rates of economic development, economic well-being, and production, will they increase or decrease? If I have a mass of excellent, high-quality pharmaceuticals, I can probably increase the health and the welfare of my workforce. If I have a mass of bad heroin or cocaine, if I add that in, then it has the opposite effect. So the question of value, you can't determine the value of anything apart from the total productive process. What happens if you add it? What happens if you take it away? So the price is irrelevant, right? Price and value, another way to say this is, price and value diverge. The market says that a Cartier watch is worth $25,000, but from a productive point of view, it's worth very little, much less, right? It's not what you need. So price, value, that's the subjective and objective dichotomy that you always have to deal with, and which is periodically reestablished. But that means at any given time, price has nothing to say about value, and this is the problem of the marginal people. So, law of value is a much bigger question. What's better, steel or derivatives? It's better to have steel, isn't it? Because derivatives are toxic. You have to pay somebody to take it away, right? Remember in the Little Abner cartoons of Al Cap, there was a currency called the Raspuchnik. Supposed to be the ruble, I guess. The idea was it had negative value because if you had a mass of it on your property, you had to pay the sanitation people to come and take it away. What's better, computer chips or potato chips? From the point of view of these price characters, they'd say, well, if it's the same value, then they're equal, right? In other words, $1 million worth of computer chips is the same as $1 million worth of potato chips. but it's not. If you want to have a full set economy, if you want to survive, if you don't want to become ethnographic material, you got to realize that computer chips are better to have than potato chips. And you better make sure that you do it, because otherwise you will become ethnographic material. Another important point, right? The refutation of Malthus is that people are wealth. You want to have people. Gobernar es poblar, says the Spanish proverb. To govern is to populate. There was once something called natalism, to try to promote family formation and the birth of children. De Gaulle had a program in France in the 50s and 60s. He wanted 100 million Frenchmen. Not a bad idea. I tried very hard. Maybe somebody can help me here. I think there's a quote from Abraham Lincoln where he says the Mississippi River Valley should have a population of about 600 million people. Couldn't find it. I think it exists. Let's be looking. All right, so the British and the Austrian schools failed to account for people. Where do they come from? And again, the problem that we deal with, the decline in the U.S. standard of living, some people find this shocking, right? And one of the problems is that the data series of the Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, that has been cooked. If you read my book there, I write about the Boskin Commission under Bush the Elder. And the guy said, look, you got to understand, the standard of living is higher now. It's higher. We've got tremendous progress. He said, I can go to my local deli and get white wine. I couldn't do that before. My living standard is higher. This is typical of professional economists. So one problem, of course, is the runaway shop. The good-paying jobs have been exported to sweatshop economies with coolie labor and then re-imported under free trade. We have now a low-wage economy in the U.S., Walmart, and all the rest of it. We were discussing in the dinner break, Walmart is a monopsonist, right? It's a monopoly would be one person selling. A monopsony, one entity is buying. So from the point of view of retail sales in the U.S., it's not quite, because you do have Kmart, at least for the moment, and you've got Costco and others, but practically there's one big gorilla that dominates this, called it oligopsonist, right? And that's Walmart. And they have a low-wage policy, they have a sweatshop policy, and they're dragging down the entire thing. They have successfully imposed the Confederate model on the rest of the United States, and it's not pretty. Union busting, from Reagan and the air traffic controllers to Governor Walker. It also means that among the unions, all is not well, corruption, defeatism, and so forth. The idea is that a lot of trade union officials are actually creatures of the FBI. They're all on the Federal Witness Protection Program, and they've been allowed to stay in their places, but they could be arrested at any time, so don't expect them to lead a mass strike. There have been federal tax increases. One is this, when they say, oh, wasn't it great when Reagan could cooperate with Tip O'Neill? Tax reform. Well, what was the tax reform? Reagan lowered taxes for the rich. A huge deficit emerged. So they said, let's increase the Social Security payroll tax. We'll gouge it out of the little guys. And then with that money, we'll run the government. We'll loot the Social Security Trust Fund. And that's what they did under Reagan and Tip O'Neill. We used to call him Tipsy O'Neill because he was reputed to be an alcoholic. We have increases in regressive state taxes, especially the sales tax. The Social Security payroll tax is also regressive. It doesn't need to be. It could be proportional. Remove the cap, tax all income. But the state taxes, especially the sales tax, is a regressive tax. Right? You know the three kinds of taxes: regressive, proportional, and progressive. The most regressive is the poll tax. Poll tax. The poll tax is a single sum for everybody. Everybody pays 100. For a millionaire, it's nothing. For a working family, that's a lot. That was what brought down Thatcher. Thatcher tried to switch the British to a poll tax, regressive taxation system. Even in Britain, she couldn't get it through. Then you have proportional, but proportional is really no good either. Progressive. The problem with the regressive tax is that it cuts into the necessities of the poor and the amenities of the middle class, but does not touch the luxuries of the super rich. So this is not fair. Therefore, progressive. And the demand for a progressive tax comes from the populists in the United States, and it comes from the French leftists of the 19th century. The idea of a progressive income tax was a very contentious issue because the rich didn't want to pay it, you can imagine. So the idea of abolishing the income tax is actually a reactionary plan. What you want to do with the income tax is make it more progressive. One way to do that is to say, well, we're going to increase the standard deduction, and we're going to increase the personal exemptions, so that for a family of 4, the first $50,000 is tax-free. In the Syriza program says the first 12,000 euros tax-free. That's already something, right? So that takes care of protecting the poor from taxation. You also got the problem of longer commutes, and it's no longer from the suburb to the center city. It's often from suburb to suburb. This is quite a drive. Now, in terms of official inflation, we propose to use the postage stamp method. The 49-cent postage of today, first class, it's still a bargain in today's world, by the way. That's a very good price compared to what? What is it in Austria?
62 cents.
62 euro centime.
Yes.
So 2/3 of a euro, let's say. Well, look at that. This is a whole lot less. So from the 1958, the sort of Eisenhower-Kennedy 4-cent rate has now become 49-cent rate. This means that inflation is in the neighborhood of 1,225%. Now that's hyperinflation. Of course, that's over decades because of productive decline. This is not some matter of currency markets. This is a long-term trend. And then college costs have gone up 15 times for the 1,500% for the elite schools. And from 78 to 2012, it's 1,120% on college. And we also have health costs, which are also health insurance and similar costs have gone way up.
How do we explain that massive increase in tuition and college costs? Yeah.
Why, marginal utility. No, it's simply there's a huge demand and a growing demand. There's a justified demand, right? That guy Bennett, have we been through him? He says, Bennett says, your college is not worth it. Hey, Bennett, where's your kid? At Harvard. Everybody wants it, right? Desperation, right? A middle-class family will do almost anything to educate these children, right? There's a grim determination. Man, have you been on it from the inside? I have. Boy, you better fight to get the financial aid and get it. Admission means nothing, right? Admission is who cares, right? Funded scholarship is what you have to have. I will not blame this on any federal program.
That's what libertarians.
I know, that's the reactionary view, is that the government is trying to help you to go to college, and therefore the evil deconstructionists raise the price.
It's like artificial demand or something.
How is it artificial? The basic fact is everybody needs a bachelor's degree. You want to be working in the 21st century, get a bachelor's degree. The bachelor's degree is now the same thing as a high school diploma. If you want a college degree, you better get an MA or beyond. You got to get an advanced degree. I'd recommend a terminal degree, but let's not mess around with terminal, right? It might be misinterpreted. You come out brain dead. So, no. This is because what we're seeing here, look, it's not so strange. If the ability of $1, the ability of $1 to command the physical universe has been eroded.
Right, it's purchasing power.
Because look, if you add up postage, right? Postage includes so many things, right? Wages, plant, equipment, fuel, trucks, a lot of stuff. goes into a postage stamp. It's a very good cross-section of a whole economy, right?
But the difference is that you could pay off going to a place like Stanford with a summer job, and now you're in debt for life.
It used to be, this is based on the idea that Harvard used to be $1,500 tuition and fees in the Eisenhower-Kennedy era, and now it's $40,000.
It's got to be more than that.
Tuition and fees.
Yeah.
That's not room and board. That's just tuition and fees.
Books is NYU is $55,000.
Yeah, NYU is a notorious expensive.
My dad
I'm just saying some are up there.
Went to Stanford, and he paid $800 a semester, and he said he paid it off working summer jobs and
Yeah.
got out of college debt free. And now you can't even get student loans for it's $45,000 a year.
It's because the dollar is less and less able to command physical products in the physical universe. In other words, all the stuff that goes into it, the fuel, heating the buildings, the maintenance of the buildings. And then it's just a general process, and it's not really that far out of line with the general inflation. If the postage stamp is practically 1,250%, this is about 1,500, it's a little bit more, but it's not that much more. And that more is the spreading idea, right? In 58 to 63, you could say, I don't need to go to college. I'll get a high school diploma and get a good job at the local plant. That's all gone. So now there's a tremendous push on the family. Get the kid to college, because otherwise he's going to drop out of the middle class. Your kid is going to precipitate into the lumpen proletariat. That's Marx's category. You have the working class, and then below that you have the proletariat in rags. The lumpen, das Lumpenproletariat. And those poor guys are thieves, pimps, prostitutes, panhandlers, right? The mob. But you don't want that for your kid, do you? You've got to fight. You've got to keep out of that. So you want to go to college. And you want health care. Now, here we come to economic analysis in the real form, the real classic sense. Now, let me stress, this is not money. It's not money. It's people. This is your productive workforce that you're going to see here. That's what these bar graphs represent. Here is, to begin with, your entire national population. They're represented by this bar graph. We have to then distinguish that in general terms, I think it's still accurate, that people between 18 and 21 are probably not yet in the labor force, right? They should be going to college, according to our plan, right? Even 22, you should still be in college if you can be there. And generally speaking, over 65, there's a tendency of people to retire, which I think is a mistake, right? Retirement is for wimps. That's a ticket to an early grave. Don't do it. Don't plan it. Retirement is for wimps. But of course, there are people who do heavy physical labor who it's an absolute necessity. Right? Yeah. So if you haven't had that, though, you ought to think about how you're going to survive. Now, here's what we've done is then we've broken this out. We've taken this part of the population, these people, and we're now displaying them in this bar graph. And the idea with this is, what are they doing? How have you assigned? How are you using your labor force of people? Not money, but people, because this is real economics. Now, any society will have to, first of all, pay its wage bill in the broadest sense. Everything that goes into your standard of living, your market basket of consumption, food, medicine, the things you have to buy, right? Everything that you consume. This is V is for variable capital. These letters are traditional, and they come from any number of 19th century economists, from Ricardo to Marx and all kinds of people in between. Variable capital is the wage bill, the market basket, and it's in the broadest sense, right? Everything, your clothing, your housing, all the things that the workforce requires, okay? Wages. Constant capital is maintenance, to maintain and restore all of your hard infrastructure, your railroads, your factories, your machines, your cars, all kinds of industrial equipment has to be kept ready to continue the production process. So maintenance of what exists, the existing productive stock, your machine tools, the various components of your factories, your assembly lines, and so forth. Maintaining all of that. So here you're maintaining your labor force. You cannot underpay the V, because then you're going to be damaging the viability of your labor force, and you can't avoid paying for the C. When the question, Greg, about the railroads, right? If you have a railroad and you don't pay the maintenance, you're asset stripping the railroad. And if you underpay C, it's like asset stripping a railroad. You get cash out of it, but it's going to be bad. And again, this is the people that you've assigned to do that. Now, out of wages and maintaining your plant and equipment and your infrastructure and everything else, you're going to generate a surplus. The secret of industrial capitalism is that it does generate a real surplus. Real. Not only through robbery, not only through robbing Indians or pre-existing, pre-capitalist economic formations, but by production. The whole secret, if it hadn't been so, we would not be here. Industrial capitalism, if it's properly managed, will create a real surplus, and the society can go on with that. You're not simply limited to robbing people, as Howard Zinn would say. He said, the profits of American industry are all robbery. No. Some yes, but the profits of Wall Street are very largely robbery. But in industry, this is not so. So what you're going to have then is a surplus, which is the two forms of S. Now, this S, the lower part of the surplus, is what we can call overhead. And it simply means the expenses of a given social system with its inequities and its injustices built in. In other words, if you have a lousy income distribution, you need a police force. They're going to be up here. You're always going to need an army, most likely. So your military, your police, your government bureaucracy, your corporate bureaucracy. But then other people who are the consequences of, in this case, finance capital rule, the unemployed. People are unemployed and underemployed. They're going to have to be in this area because they are a cost, right? They're part of the overhead, part of the expense of keeping the system going. So there's a lot of consumption there, right? Government employees, party officials, hangers-on, patronage bosses, all this stuff, right? Those people are up here, and they don't really produce anything, but they're kept busy here. Now, if you're lucky, you are then left with S prime. And S prime is your absolute surplus. This is the surplus which can be reinvested for the following year. And S prime comes into existence as what? New productive labor that can be hired and put to work, and new factories, and also new infrastructure, right? Because you've got to regard that. Transportation is a physical change in the order of nature. In other words, when you move commodities from here to there, it's a physical change in the order of nature, and if that's what you need, you got to have that. So this comes into existence as new factories and new productive workers, and eventually they're going to go down here, right? They're going to be added to what these people are busy doing. The basic measure of health of an economy is bearing in mind, once again, that these are parts of your labor force. These are people who have been put to work or otherwise assigned to these categories. Oop, this has to be plus. I'm sorry, it's not equal. That's a very serious problem. C plus V. S prime over C plus V. What you're aiming at is that the value of this expression should increase, that the part of your labor force that you're able to devote to the absolute surplus is growing compared to the combined parts that you're devoting to your variable capital, your wage bill, and your plant and equipment and infrastructure maintenance group, right? Keeping that going. And of course, you want to define this very largely, right? Really, this extends to the biosphere. You can call this biosphere maintenance, right? Keep it all going, and here is your labor force maintenance. You want S prime over C plus V, plus V, to be rising at an increasing rate. So you want this to be rising, and you want it to be increasing. So the second derivative is positive.
So according to the law of value, doesn't inserting marijuana into the economy decrease the value?
It does.
It decreases the value of the workforce?
Yeah, it does.
We constantly hear the narrative, we've got to insert marijuana
Right.
to make the
Right.
economy better. And you're saying it decreases, I'm just saying it decreases the value of the workforce.
Yeah, it does. It destroys your labor force. In other words, these are people. Once again, these are people, not money, not commodities. But by making marijuana or heroin or other poisons, really, available to workers, you're destroying your labor force, right? They typically turn to that when they're unemployed.
The devil's advocate would say you'd reduce the prison population, which is overhead.
It's overhead, it's all here. It's consequence of finance capital rule. But so you want to kill people.
No, but you don't want to send people to prison for marijuana.
The
either. We're not advocating sending
decriminalization
people-
versus like legalization idea.
It's just it's toxic, and above all, the mental capital, right? In other words, the big argument here is you've got to invest in a productive labor force. You've got to invest in health and education for your labor force. Marijuana, I'm sorry, it does. It causes cognitive impairment. I'm sorry, it does. And some people like it, some don't. But it causes cognitive impairment.
Well,
Watch
we're not
out.
advocating sending people to prison.
No, nor exterminating anybody. Please, we're not exterminating anybody.
What are we going to call the output of this equation? Like, what is the...
This
what are
is
we
the
accepting for?
the idea is that these people are producing, and the model we have here. This is a productive economy.
Okay.
So this is producing something because it has an absolute surplus, right? So this is a fairly healthy economy, right? This might have been the U.S. 40 years ago or so, right?
And the goal being that you want to invest more and more, like in next year's production, that you spent on this.
Yes, in other words, the more focus on V is it's the immediate, some people might say hand to mouth. In other words, what you want to do is you want to be able to have a rising standard of living. And this does not measure standard of living. It measures people in the workforce assigned to different tasks. For example, if you say the U.S. economy depends to 70% on consumer spending, that's bad. That's too much. And it doesn't mean that we want to lower anybody's standard of living. Quite the opposite. We want to raise the standard of living, but we want to have more emphasis on capital goods. Germany, Japan, healthier. Living standard is comparable, a little bit lower, above even, but they have capital goods that are still going, whereas our capital goods are kaput. We don't have capital goods. We've got to reacquire that. And you can't have a recovery, as we saw with the Pelosi stimulus, right? If you have a Keynesian consumer-led recovery attempt, it will fail. As long as the federal government was providing the stimulus, it did some good. Certainly, it did a lot of good. But once that stimulus is removed, there's nothing self-sustaining about this. Whereas, if you do the infrastructure approach that we're arguing for, right, the $5 trillion to begin with and then more, because it will catch on, then you can say this will get the capital goods industries going: steel, railroads, locomotives, generators, nuclear plants, whatever, cable, all the things, right? I mean, long distance electrical power lines, things like this. Right? Once you get your capital goods industries going, then if you have some source of demand that goes on, that leads to then a recovery that becomes more and more self-sustaining. Now, suppose we have a left liberal. Let's see if we have a left liberal mushhead. Okay, a left liberal mushhead might say, "Wait a minute, this is rotten. That's capitalist profit." Yes, it's a real absolute profit. In other words, it's what the society has produced. Now, the capitalists are going to steal it. And how about this? I don't want to have all this stuff for machines, right? I want to put people first. Okay, let's put people first. Here's your economic model. Only V. What is that?
Your wage.
Huh?
Wages.
But what kind of economy is described here? Huh? I don't know. An economy where everybody only works for immediate consumption. Services, yeah.
Hunter-gatherer.
There.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice.
That's hunting and gathering. That's alley-oop.
Day to day.
There's no capital investment. There's no maintenance of capital investment. There's no surplus. There's no state. Right? There's no S. It's sometimes called capitalist consumption. There's no surplus S prime. There's no cost of overhead S. There's no capital goods. There's There's only V. And the example of this would be the classic one in these courses has been the so-called strand lopers, a culture on the coast of Africa. You go running along, you come to a dead body of an animal, eat it, fall asleep, and then rush on to find the next one. Then there was hunting and gathering. Nuts, berries, carcasses, hunting if you can, but you don't have any. You have zero capital goods. You don't have an axe. Maybe you have a rock. I don't know. But this would be the paradise of the left liberal mushheads. They would say, yes, let's put everything to work for people. Let's put people first. Not so good, because at this rate, you know what the average life expectancy here would be? 25? None of us would be here, right? We'd all be gone if it were only V. So in other words, what I'm trying to say with this is, this seems to say we want to raise the standard of living, but actually you've destroyed the standard of living, right? You have no standard of living. It's not even living. Now, let me see what I can find here. Here. How about this one? Here's the United States today. There's no S prime. No real surplus is being created. There is overhead. Oh boy, is there overhead. This is retail sales, financial services, a prison population, an army, police force, we've got lawyers. Yes, actually. Look, you have to distinguish. No. Let's say something nice about the lawyers. Is that a certain level of this legal activity can be described as socially necessary or maybe neutral. I don't know. And in other words, the point is that it's excessive. Because remember, the secret of the overhead is that they're not directly productive. They can be socially necessary, but only as a function of the productive labor force. So doctors and nurses are absolutely socially necessary, but you've got to try to relate them to the number of productive workers that you have, because that's their job, is to maintain the productive labor force. And of course then becomes, by extension, everybody else. So look, the C is being under-serviced, right? These are people. As we said, the capital stock of the United States is being looted by asset strippers. So the C is way too low in terms of the workers assigned to do that. Right? We used to have firemen and brakemen. We don't have that anymore. We got nothing. And the V, this is also being underserved. These people, it's certainly true that farmers can now feed far more people, right? It used to be 90% of the U.S. was farmers. Now it's 2%, 3%? It's probably too low. That's probably a little bit too low. But the rest of it is this overhead. Walmart, retail sales, financial services, Wall Street, and so forth. Prisoners, police, army, the underemployed, the unemployed. This is a society in big trouble. And with this, the standard of living goes down.
No, I just commented depressing.
So
All
would
right, now here would be progress. Go ahead.
so I mean, China's would be C, would be like our
China's
S
might
right now.
look more like this. This would be progress for anybody. Now again, you're going to have a big absolute surplus. Every year, you're developing new plant and equipment and new productive labor, and you're putting them to work. You're realizing the surplus. You do have overhead. You want to have plenty of doctors, nurses, and so forth in relation to your productive labor. But here now, this is no longer that you're underpaying these expenses, that the productivity of labor is now so high that you can feed everybody with far fewer farmers, and you can do all your maintenance because you've automated it, and you can get that done. And the proof of the health is, what is your real surplus? See, that somehow, if you want it's like a balance sheet. How do you read a balance sheet? How do you read this? You look at the absolute surplus up here of plant and equipment being produced by them and real productive labor that's coming out of them. And maybe that's something like China. Now think about this stuff, and remember once again, you're not dealing with money aggregates, you're not dealing with stocks, you're not dealing with the subjective side in any way. This is the objective side. Those are people. And your goal, therefore, is, again, S prime over C plus V, expanding and expanding at an increasing rate. And that is one way to measure an economy. And when you're thinking about this, Rosa Luxemburg was a communist, certainly. She was one of the founders of the German Communist Party. And she talked about the total capitalist. In other words, what you're doing is you're taking an entire national economy and treating it as one integrated agro-industrial firm. So it's production, factories, and farming all together. Unfortunately, the financial services and retail sales boys have gotten in there, but you're dealing with a total analysis, at the very least, of the whole country. And better yet, the world economy, right? We should have a world expression for this. What are people doing around the world, right? Undoubtedly, there are too many peasants in very inefficient operations. There's a lot of maintenance that could be automated because you want to get the surplus up here. You want this to be growing faster than the combined V and C. Okay. Now, just one of the things that struck me lately in the Washington Post, they did have a series about economics. I've even showed you a quote from it before. The Washington Post described Wall Street as a black hole for our best and brightest. Wall Street is expanding and the economy is worse off for it. And they've concluded that the financial sector has grown so large that it is slowing economic growth. Now, I take it that that is people. In other words, there are too many people going into this. And they say it used to be that smart people would go into management or whatever. And then it became only Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, I've read a lot of articles in the Wall Street Journal and other places that they have people in Wall Street called quants. The quantitative.
It's written up in my book. It's all, a reader, look,
Okay. But they're like
a yuppie quant.
people with engineering, science, mathematics backgrounds that would otherwise be working in scientific industrial areas are getting sucked off into Wall Street.
Yes.
To do the mathematical modeling for
Right.
derivatives.
Yes, for
And it's
derivatives.
insane.
I can tell you, I used to look at the Princeton catalog, right? And I had some Princeton catalogs, and I'd look at the School of Engineering. So they had mechanical, civil, electrical, What else did they have? They had various departments of different kinds of engineering. And now, I looked lately, and there's financial engineering, and that's bigger than all the rest of them put together. Financial engineering? Are we nuts? How to design derivatives, how to be a yuppie quant. The Black-Scholes model, right? The wonderful success of long-term capital management. It's crazy. Mark to model. Don't do it. So, in the United States, the financial sector is parasitizing other areas, and this Philippon says that the U.S. is spending $300 billion too much on finance, and I take it this doesn't mean what you pay to to buy derivatives. It means the wages, the bonuses, the salaries of the people that are engaged in this. Now, I would also say $300 billion is probably about what a 1% Wall Street sales tax would give you. So the Wall Street sales tax would tend to redress this balance. Let's try it. It's very hard to predict that because once you have the Wall Street sales tax, speculation would go down, but some of it would persist.
Wouldn't it be more than that if Van Hollen just estimated, because he had to do a study for that bill, that it was $80 billion and he's only doing 0.1%?
Right, but there's the countervailing effect is that you're going to be deterring a lot of speculation, right? So you gotta, nobody can tell that. Again, that's exactly where a mathematical model might be helpful, but you can't expect it to be accurate because there's too much subjectivity. There's too much free will in that. Even these creatures have free will. So I thought this was interesting, but they seem to be saying, finally, that the financial sector has absorbed too much talented manpower, exactly as was just pointed out by the delegate from Frederick. So here it is. A black hole. Striking.
Actually, I see this at the Stevens Institute of Technology. It's the #3 engineering school in the country. And when I worked the census in 2010, I was there with faculty members, physicists, mathematicians, astrophysicists, people who taught civil engineering, marine architecture. The only faculty that's basically graduating a lot of people and making a lot of money is financial engineering, and it's all computational finance. So people don't build anything. Unemployed civil engineers and chemical engineers out there going to ignore the census because there was nothing else.
Civil, electrical, chemical, hydraulic,
marine architects, people design ships.
And this is new, right? This has happened in the last 10 years, 15 years.
20 to 30 years. The
started
casino.
with the
It's
movie Wall
it's in the book, right? There's a whole thing about the over financialization, the casino economy, parasitism growing. And here we have Harvard and the University of Chicago. Hey, they write that every dollar a worker earns in a research field generates $5 in the rest of the economy. Right? This is the NASA, the spin-off calculation. Right? You invest in a moonshot. Let's go for a Mars shot. For every dollar you spend on your moonshot or Mars shot, you're going to get $5 generated in the rest of the economy. For every dollar that somebody earns in finance, the economy loses 60 cents. Says the Washington Post. And it's true. I mean, this may be understating, but this is the idea. That the more financial services you have, the poorer you will be.